The morning air on Kepler station carried the familiar scent of recycled oxygen mixed with the faint metallic tang that came from housing 12 different alien species under one massive dome. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her worn teaching tablet as she walked through the corridors, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished floors. Around her, the usual bustle of interspecies commerce and diplomacy hummed with its typical organized chaos. She had been on Kepler station for 3 years now, working as a xenobiology researcher, but today marked something entirely different. Today, she would meet the class that had already burned through 24 teachers in the span of 6 months. The administrative council had been desperate when they approached her, desperate enough to offer triple her research salary and full diplomatic immunity for what they called educational consultation services. The euphemism didn't hide the truth. Nobody else wanted to deal with class designation 7 Alpha. Sarah paused outside classroom Wing Delta, checking her tablet one more time. The files made for grim reading. 24 teachers from across the galaxy had attempted to educate these particular students. The Zentorian scholar had lasted 3 days before requesting immediate transfer to a war zone, claiming it would be safer. A crystalline entity known for its infinite patience had actually developed what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Even a hive-mind collective had given up, stating that the individual personalities within the class were incompatible with structured learning environments. The students weren't just from different worlds. They were from species classified as apex predators from their respective home planets. Their parents were diplomats, military commanders, trade representatives, and other high-ranking officials stationed on Kepler. The children couldn't be sent home due to the distance and political complexities, but they couldn't be left uneducated either. Hence the parade of failed teachers and Sarah's current predicament. She pressed her palm against the security scanner and heard the soft chime of acceptance. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The classroom erupted in chaos the moment she stepped inside. A projectile, what appeared to be a standardized learning stylus, whistled past her head and embedded itself in the wall behind her with a solid thunk. Something that looked like blue slime splattered against the far wall, while an ear-piercing shriek echoed from the corner where several desks had been overturned to form what could generously be called a fortress. Sarah stood perfectly still in the doorway, taking in the scene. Her xenobiology training kicked in automatically, cataloging and analyzing what she observed. In the left corner, a young Thrakari was suspended upside down from the ceiling fixtures, his 6 limbs wrapped around the support beams. Thrakari were descended from arboreal pack hunters, and this one, she checked her tablet quickly, named Zix, was displaying classic territorial dominance behavior. His golden eyes tracked her movement while his mouth remained slightly open, revealing rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. Near the overturned desks, a small Corvan female was methodically shredding what appeared to be educational materials. Corvan evolved from solitary ambush predators, and this one, Kresh, was demonstrating stress displacement behavior by destroying anything within reach. Her forearms moved in precise, controlled motions, each ending in retractable claws that could slice through most standard materials. A Nexari youth sat in the center of the room, perfectly motionless except for the subtle shimmer that indicated active camouflage. Nexari were apex predators from a world of constant twilight, evolved to be living shadows. The only reason Sarah could see Vex at all was because of his incomplete emotional control. Young Nexari couldn't maintain perfect camouflage when agitated. In the back corner, 2 Drakmori siblings were engaged in what appeared to be a mock battle, complete with bared fangs and aggressive posturing. Drakmori were pack hunters from a high-gravity world, built like terrestrial wolves, but standing nearly 4 feet tall even as adolescents. The files identified them as Rake and Senna, and their playfighting was probably serving as both stress relief and dominance establishment. Aquilin youth had wrapped himself in his own membranous wings near the window, creating a dark cocoon. Quillen were flying predators with heightened sensory capabilities, and young Nim was likely overwhelmed by the sensory chaos in the room and attempting to self-soothe. The final student, a Hector named Jax, was systematically dismantling one of the classroom terminals with the methodical precision of his species. Hector were tool-using predators, highly intelligent and naturally inclined toward mechanical problem-solving. Unfortunately, they applied this skill set to everything, including things that weren't meant to be taken apart. Sarah remained motionless for a full minute, simply observing. Every instinct from her xenobiology background was cataloging behaviors, stress responses, and social dynamics. These weren't unruly children. They were young apex predators thrust into an environment that triggered every survival instinct they possessed. The Thrakari, Zix, dropped down from the ceiling with fluid grace, landing in a crouch about 10 feet from Sarah. His head tilted to one side in a gesture she recognized as curious assessment rather than aggression. "Another teacher," he said in perfectly modulated galactic standard, though his accent carried the distinctive harmonic undertones of his species. "You lasted longer than most before running." "I haven't run," Sarah replied calmly, stepping fully into the classroom and letting the door seal behind her. "I'm observing." The Corvan Kresh paused in her systematic destruction of learning materials. "Observing what? How quickly we can make you quit." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression rather than the nervous grimace she'd seen in the recordings left by previous teachers. "I'm observing some of the most remarkable examples of adaptive behavior I've ever seen." The statement caused a ripple of confusion through the room. The Nexari's camouflage flickered more noticeably, indicating surprise. The Drakmori siblings stopped their mock combat to stare at her. Even the cocooned Quillen shifted position slightly. "You're not afraid of us," stated Jax the Hector, his mechanical work forgotten as he turned to face her directly. It wasn't a question. "Should I be?" Sarah asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "You're all displaying completely normal stress responses to an abnormal situation. Why would that frighten me?" She walked slowly toward the center of the room, moving with the deliberate, non-threatening gait she'd learned when working with dangerous research subjects. "May I sit down?" The question seemed to surprise them. Previous teachers had immediately begun asserting authority, demanding order, threatening consequences. Sarah simply waited for permission. Zix exchanged glances with the others, a complex bit of interspecies communication involving subtle posture changes and brief eye contact. Finally, he nodded. Sarah carefully righted one of the overturned chairs and sat down, placing her tablet on the floor beside her rather than holding it defensively. The action triggered another round of subtle communication among the students. "Tell me," she said conversationally, "what did the other teachers try to teach you?" "Standard curriculum," Rake answered, his voice carrying the gruff undertones typical of Drakmori. "Mathematical concepts, linguistic studies, cultural exchange protocols, scientific methodology." "Boring stuff," added his sister Senna. "Nothing useful." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Useful for what?" The question seemed to catch them off guard again. Kresh's four arms gestured expressively as she spoke. "For survival, for hunting, for understanding our environment, for protecting our pack bonds." "Ah," Sarah said, as if a great mystery had been solved. "So the previous teachers were trying to educate you using prey species methodologies." The silence that followed was profound. Even the Quillen Nim peeked out from his wing cocoon to stare at her. "What do you mean?" Vex asked, his camouflage stabilizing as his curiosity overcame his stress response. Sarah leaned back in her chair, adopting a relaxed posture that nonetheless kept her balanced and ready to move if necessary. "Think about it from an educational ecology perspective. Most galactic species evolved as prey animals, herd creatures, or cooperative gatherers. Their educational systems are built around shared knowledge absorption, rote learning, and conformity to established patterns. It's how they survived, by learning from the group and following proven successful behaviors." She gestured around the room. "But you're all from predator species. Your brains evolved to analyze, adapt, hunt, and problem-solve in real time. You learn through experience, challenge, and direct application. Trying to teach you like prey species is like trying to train a Terran wolf using techniques designed for sheep." The Hector, Jax, sat up straighter. "You're saying the educational system is fundamentally incompatible with our cognitive structures." "Exactly," Sarah smiled again, "which means we need a completely different approach." Zix dropped down from his new perch on a nearby desk. "What kind of approach?" Instead of answering immediately, Sarah stood and walked over to the damaged terminal that Jax had been dismantling. She examined his work with professional interest. "Excellent disassembly technique," she noted. "Clean separation of components, no unnecessary damage to individual parts. You understand the system architecture." Jax blinked in surprise. "You're not angry that I broke it?" You didn't break it, Sarah corrected. You deconstructed it. There's a significant difference. The question is, can you reconstruct it? Of course, Jack said, a note of pride entering his voice. Then do it. But this time, explain to the others how each component functions and why it's necessary for the whole. As Jax began reassembling the terminal with enthusiastic precision, Sarah turned to address the rest of the class. Each of you has been displaying natural learning behaviors that your previous teachers interpreted as disruptive. But what if, instead of trying to suppress those behaviors, we used them as teaching tools? She walked over to where Kresh had been shredding materials. Kresh, you have exceptional fine motor control and analytical skills. Your species excels at pattern recognition through tactile exploration. Kresh looked at her suspiciously. So, Sarah picked up one of the shredded documents, a star chart that had been reduced to geometric confetti. So what if, instead of reading about stellar cartography, you learned it by physically manipulating three-dimensional star maps? What if you could literally feel the gravitational relationships between celestial bodies? For the first time since Sarah had entered the room, Kresh looked genuinely interested rather than hostile. Zix, Sarah continued, turning to the Thrakari. Your species has natural three-dimensional spatial awareness and exceptional proprioceptive abilities. Traditional education forces you to sit still and absorb information passively. But what if we turned the entire classroom into a learning environment that required movement, climbing, and spatial problem-solving? Zix's golden eyes widened slightly. You mean like a hunt? Exactly like a hunt. A hunt for knowledge, where the challenge is intellectual rather than physical, but the methodology remains familiar to your instincts. She addressed the Drakmori siblings next. Rake, Senna, your species learns through pack dynamics and competitive challenge. What if we structured lessons as collaborative competitions? What if learning became a pack activity where you could challenge each other while working toward shared goals? The two siblings exchanged glances, and Sarah caught the subtle tail movements that indicated excited interest in Drakmori body language. Nim, she said gently, looking toward the still partially cocooned Quillen. Your sensory capabilities are extraordinary. Traditional classrooms overwhelm you with chaotic stimuli that interfere with your natural learning processes. What if we created controlled sensory environments that actually enhanced your abilities instead of overwhelming them? A wingtip emerged from the cocoon, followed by one large, dark eye. And Vex, Sarah said, addressing the space where she knew the Nexari youth was sitting despite his active camouflage. Your species excels at observation and analysis from a position of concealment. What if we made stealth and observation integral parts of the learning process rather than trying to force you into visible participation? The shimmer that marked Vex's location stabilized slightly. You want us to spy on our lessons? I want you to hunt information, Sarah corrected. I want all of you to approach learning the way your species approaches survival, with every advantage you possess rather than trying to suppress your natural abilities. She returned to her chair and sat down again. But here's the thing about predator education. It requires trust between teacher and students, not the authority-submission dynamic that most educational systems rely on, but actual trust between capable individuals working toward shared goals. Jax looked up from his terminal reconstruction. What kind of trust? The kind where I trust you to challenge everything I tell you, to question my methods, and to find better solutions when they exist. The kind where you trust me to provide you with genuine challenges rather than artificial obstacles, and to respect your capabilities rather than trying to diminish them. Sarah looked around the room at 7 young faces, some still partially hidden, others beginning to show genuine curiosity rather than defensive hostility. So here's my proposal, she said. We abandon the traditional curriculum entirely. Instead, we create a learning environment that functions like a predator pack in educational ecology. Everyone has strengths to contribute, everyone has challenges to overcome, and everyone participates in making our shared learning environment successful. She paused, studying their reactions. But I need to know that you're willing to engage in this experiment, not because I'm an authority figure demanding compliance, but because you're intelligent beings capable of making informed decisions about your own education. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Sarah could practically hear the rapid processing happening in 7 highly developed predator brains. Finally, Zix spoke. What would we learn? Everything, Sarah replied. Mathematics through three-dimensional problem-solving and spatial challenges. Science through hands-on experimentation and real observation. History through tactical analysis and cultural hunting strategies. Language through competitive wordplay and pack communication exercises. Engineering through construction challenges and systematic deconstruction projects. She gestured toward Jax's nearly completed terminal reconstruction. We'd learn by doing, building, competing, hunting, and conquering intellectual challenges the same way your species conquered physical ones. Kresh raised one of her 4 hands. What about standardized testing requirements, diplomatic educational protocols? Our parents expect traditional academic achievements. Sarah's smile turned slightly predatory. Your parents expect results. They expect their children to be educated, capable, and successful. The methods we use to achieve those results are entirely up to us. She stood again, moving with the fluid confidence that came from a plan beginning to take shape. Besides, I think you'll find that predator learning methodologies produce superior results to traditional approaches. When you're genuinely engaged, intellectually challenged, and operating within your natural cognitive frameworks, you'll exceed every standard expectation. The Drakmori siblings were now sitting upright, ears forward in a posture of keen attention. The Quillen had emerged entirely from his wing cocoon. Even the Nexari's camouflage had stabilized completely, indicating a state of focused interest rather than stress. There is one condition, Sarah added casually. 7 pairs of predator eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. This only works if we operate as a real pack. That means looking out for each other, contributing your strengths to help others overcome their weaknesses, and maintaining pack loyalty even when individuals disagree with specific tactics. She paused, letting the implications settle. It also means that if anyone decides they'd prefer traditional educational approaches, they're free to request a transfer to a different class. No judgment, no consequences. But if you stay, you commit to making this work for everyone. Jax finished the terminal reconstruction with a satisfied click. The device hummed to life, all systems functioning perfectly. He looked up at Sarah with something approaching respect in his mechanical gaze. When do we start? He asked. Sarah checked her chronometer. Right now. First challenge. This classroom is designed for prey species education. Your task is to redesign it as a predator learning environment. You have the rest of today. Use any resources available on the station, but everything you do has to be justifiable in terms of improved learning outcomes. She picked up her tablet and headed toward the door. Oh, and you'll need to present your redesigned plan to me tomorrow morning. Not a formal presentation, a hunt briefing. Convince me that your environmental modifications will make you more effective learners. As she reached the door, Senna called out, Where are you going? Sarah paused, her hand on the door control. To give you space to operate without teacher supervision. Predators learn best when they're free to use their own judgment and problem-solving skills. What if we mess something up? Nim asked, his voice still soft but no longer hiding behind his wings. Then you'll learn from the consequences and develop better strategies, Sarah replied. That's how predator education works. Real challenges, real consequences, real learning. She activated the door control, then looked back one more time. I'll be in the teacher's lounge if you need me, but I suspect you'll find you need me less than previous teachers assumed. The door slid shut behind her, and Sarah walked slowly down the corridor toward the faculty area. Behind her, she could already hear animated discussion beginning in 7 different languages. She had no idea if this approach would work. Educational psychology for predator species was still largely theoretical, but traditional methods had failed completely, and these students deserved better than the educational equivalent of trying to fit square pegs into round holes. More importantly, she was beginning to suspect that human educational instincts might be more compatible with predator learning styles than anyone had realized. Humans were, after all, persistence hunters who had evolved complex social cooperation strategies. If pack dynamics were the key to teaching predator species effectively, then perhaps her own species' approach to learning and problem-solving might provide insights that purely prey species or purely predator species teachers couldn't offer. She settled into the teacher's lounge with a cup of caffeinated beverage and began planning tomorrow's lesson, or rather, tomorrow's hunt. Because if she was right about predator education, the real learning was just beginning. 3 hours later, Sarah was deep in research about environmental learning enhancements when her communication device chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as Class 7 Alpha Group Project. She opened the message to find a detailed schematic of classroom modifications, complete with technical specifications, resource requirements, implementation timeline, and educational justification documentation. The plans were thorough, creative, and demonstrated a level of collaborative problem-solving that's supposedly impossible to educate students weren't supposed to be capable of achieving. Sarah smiled and began composing her response. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. Sarah arrived at the classroom the next morning to find the door sealed and a handwritten note attached to the access panel. Written in 7 different scripts representing each student's native language, the message was simple. Hunt begins when tracker enters the den. She pressed her palm to the scanner, and the door slid open to reveal a completely transformed space. The traditional rows of desks had been replaced with a multi-level environment that utilized every cubic meter of the classroom. Climbing structures stretched from floor to ceiling, creating pathways that would allow Zix to move through 3-dimensional space. Reconfigurable platforms provided elevated observation points while maintaining sightlines throughout the room. The lighting had been modified to create zones of varying intensity, giving NIM controllable sensory environments and Vex natural shadows for comfortable learning positions. Workstations had been distributed throughout the vertical space rather than arranged in traditional grid patterns. Each station could be quickly reconfigured for different activities, and several featured hands-on manipulation interfaces that would appeal to Cresh's tactile learning preferences. A large central area remained open for collaborative activities and pack-based learning exercises. Most impressive was the technical sophistication of the modifications. Every change had been implemented safely and professionally, with full attention to life support systems, emergency protocols, and station regulations. This wasn't student vandalism. It was expert environmental engineering accomplished in less than 4 hours. "Impressive work," Sarah said aloud, knowing that at least some of the students were already present despite the apparent emptiness of the room. A soft thud announced Zix dropping down from the ceiling area. "You approve of our modifications." "I approve of your problem-solving methodology," Sarah replied, setting her teaching materials on one of the new mobile workstations. "Walk me through your decision-making process." Other students began emerging from their chosen positions throughout the modified space. Kresh climbed down from an elevated platform, while the Drakmori siblings appeared from what had become a partially enclosed den area. Nim glided down from a perch near the modified lighting controls, and Jack stepped out from behind a bank of reconfigured computer terminals. Vex simply materialized near the center of the room as his camouflage dropped. "We started with individual species requirements," Jax explained, gesturing toward different areas of the room. "Each of us identified our optimal learning environment characteristics. Then we looked for integration opportunities and compromise solutions." Senna nodded toward the elevated platforms. "Height advantage for Zix and observation points for all of us, but positioned to maintain pack sightlines so we can monitor each other's status. Variable lighting lets NIM control sensory input while providing shadow zones for Vex," Rake added. "But we also included high-intensity work areas for detail-oriented tasks." Kresh indicated the hands-on manipulation stations. Tactile interfaces for species that learn through physical exploration, but modular enough to serve different learning objectives. "And the central area supports pack collaboration, while the individual workstations allow for species-specific task focus," Vex concluded. Sarah walked slowly through the space, examining the modifications more closely. The engineering was remarkable, but the collaborative thinking was even more impressive. 7 different species with completely different environmental and cognitive needs had found solutions that benefited everyone rather than simply compromising down to the lowest common denominator. "What about storage, material access, emergency protocols?" she asked. Nim gestured toward cleverly integrated storage solutions that had been built into the climbing structures and platform supports. "All learning materials remain easily accessible, and we actually improved storage capacity by utilizing vertical space more efficiently. Emergency protocols were our primary safety consideration," Zix added, indicating clearly marked emergency routes and access points. Every position in the room has multiple exit pathways, and no modifications interfere with life support or safety systems. Sarah nodded approvingly, and the educational justification for these changes. The 7 students exchanged glances, another example of their rapidly developing pack communication system. Jack stepped forward to serve as spokesman. Traditional classroom design assumes that learning occurs optimally when students are physically constrained to identical positions with identical sensory inputs. But our species evolved different cognitive strategies based on different environmental and social pressures. Zix learns best when he can move through space while processing information, Senna explained. Constraining him to a chair forces him to devote cognitive resources to suppressing natural movement impulses instead of focusing on learning content. My sensory processing requires controllable input levels, Nim added softly. Standard classroom lighting and acoustic environments overwhelm my system, making concentration impossible. Vex's image shimmered slightly as he spoke. My species processes information while maintaining tactical awareness of our environment. Forced visibility and fixed positioning triggers stress responses that interfere with learning. Kresh held up her 4 hands. I learn through manipulation and tactile exploration. Traditional interface systems provide inadequate sensory information for effective knowledge absorption. And we learn through pack interaction and competitive challenge, Rake concluded. Individual desk isolation prevents us from utilizing our primary cognitive and social strengths. Sarah smiled, impressed by their thorough analysis. So you redesigned the physical environment to optimize the cognitive environment. Solid reasoning. She moved to the central area and sat down cross-legged on the floor. After a moment's consideration, the students arranged themselves in a loose circle around her, each choosing a position that suited their species' comfort preferences. Today we begin what I'm calling applied problem solving, Sarah announced. Instead of studying abstract academic subjects, we're going to tackle real challenges that require mathematical analysis, scientific methodology, linguistic interpretation, cultural understanding, and engineering solutions. She activated a holographic display that projected a 3-dimensional star chart above their circle. Your first challenge scenario: the cargo ship, Meridian's Edge, has gone missing in the Kepler Nebula. No distress signal, no debris field, no trace beyond their last navigation beacon. You're the search and rescue team responsible for finding them. 7 pairs of predator eyes focused on the holographic display, with intense concentration. This is a real missing ship, Sarah continued. The disappearance happened 3 months ago. Kepler Station's official search efforts were suspended after 2 weeks. The families of the missing crew have requested that the case be reviewed by an independent analysis team. The display zoomed in to show the nebula's dense particle fields and complex gravitational interactions. Your task is to develop a comprehensive search strategy using mathematical modeling, scientific analysis, and logical deduction. But first, you need to understand the environment you're working with. Zix was already studying the 3-dimensional structure of the nebula, his spatial processing abilities allowing him to mentally navigate the complex particle fields. What kind of cargo was the ship carrying? Research materials and diplomatic correspondence bound for the Century system, Sarah replied. Nothing dangerous or valuable enough to motivate piracy. Kresh raised one hand. What was the crew composition, species, experience levels, ship familiarity? Sarah smiled. These were exactly the kinds of analytical questions she'd hoped they would ask. Mixed crew, 2 Zarathi pilots with 15 years experience each, a Trilani navigator with certification on 47 different ship classes, and a human engineer who had been with that particular ship for 8 years. The human engineer is significant, Jax observed immediately. Humans have different emergency response protocols than most species. They're more likely to attempt risky repairs rather than abandoning ship. Vex's camouflage flickered with interest. What was the ship's maintenance record? Recent repairs, known mechanical issues, scheduled maintenance dates. Now you're thinking like investigators, Sarah approved. All of that information is available in the case files, but you'll need to access the station's database, analyze maintenance records, and cross-reference the data with known mechanical failure patterns for that class of vessel. Senna perked up. Are we actually trying to solve the real case? Like, could our analysis help find the missing crew? If your work is good enough, yes, Sarah confirmed. I've already spoken with the families and with station security. They're willing to review any credible analysis that provides new insights into the disappearance. The effect of this information on the students was immediate and dramatic. Suddenly, they weren't working on a theoretical exercise. They were engaged in a real investigation that could help real people. The change in their focus and energy was palpable. What resources do we have access to? Rake asked, already shifting into practical planning mode. Everything available to a genuine investigation team, Sarah replied. Database access, simulation software, consultation with technical experts, even the possibility of conducting interviews with other ship crews who have navigated the nebula successfully. She gestured toward the modified workstations around the room. But you'll need to divide responsibilities based on your individual strengths and then integrate your findings into a comprehensive analysis. Nim glided over to examine the holographic star chart more closely. The nebula's particle density would interfere with normal sensor arrays. Standard search patterns would be ineffective. Which suggests we need to understand the specific effects of nebula particles on different types of sensors and communication equipment. Zix added, already beginning to analyze the three-dimensional structure of the search area. Sarah stood and walked over to one of the workstations. I'm going to step back and let you organize your investigation, but I want to establish some ground rules for our pack-based learning approach. She turned to address the group. First, everyone contributes according to their strengths, but everyone also participates in areas outside their specialty. Jax might be our best engineer, but everyone needs to understand the engineering aspects well enough to contribute to technical discussions. The students nodded, following the logic easily. Second, challenge each other's conclusions, but do it constructively. In a real predator pack, questioning another member's assessment isn't disrespectful, it's essential for pack survival. The same applies here. If you think someone's analysis is wrong, say so and explain why. Third, document everything. Real investigations require evidence, logical reasoning, and clear communication of findings. You'll need to be able to explain your methodology and justify your conclusions. Sarah moved toward the door. And fourth, remember that this is collaborative competition. You're competing to produce the best possible analysis, but you're competing as a team against the problem, not against each other. As she reached the door, Kresh called out, "How long do we have?" Sarah paused with her hand on the door control. Real search and rescue operations work under time pressure. You have 3 days to produce your preliminary analysis and 1 week to complete your full investigation report. What if we need help with technical concepts we don't understand? Vex asked. Ask for it, Sarah replied simply. Real investigators consult experts when they encounter information outside their knowledge base. I'll be available, and I can arrange consultations with station personnel who have relevant expertise. She activated the door, then looked back one more time. One more thing. Your previous teachers focused on what you couldn't do, what behaviors you needed to suppress, what limitations you needed to accept. This investigation is about what you can do when you're free to use every capability you possess. The door sealed behind her, and Sarah walked to the nearest observation lounge to wait. She had set up remote monitoring of the classroom's computer systems, not to spy on the students, but to track their research patterns and identify when they might need assistance. What she saw over the next hour would have amazed any of the 24 previous teachers. The students had immediately organized themselves into specialized investigation teams while maintaining constant communication about their findings. Jax and Kresh were analyzing the ship's technical specifications and maintenance records. Their combined mechanical expertise and tactile analysis skills allowing them to identify potential failure points that pure data analysis would miss. Zix and Nim were working together on environmental analysis of the nebula, combining Zix's three-dimensional spatial processing with Nim's enhanced sensory capabilities to model how the nebula's conditions would affect both ship operations and search efforts. The Drakmori siblings had taken on crew behavior analysis, using their pack dynamics expertise to model how the mixed-species crew would respond to different emergency scenarios. They were cross-referencing cultural databases to understand how each species would prioritize survival decisions. Vex was conducting what could only be described as reconnaissance on similar disappearances, using his natural stealth and observation skills to access and analyze files from across the galactic database network. Most importantly, they were constantly sharing information across teams, challenging each other's assumptions and building on each other's insights. The collaborative competition was working exactly as Sarah had hoped. She was reviewing their research methodologies when her communication device chimed with an incoming call. The caller ID identified Administrator Kylix, the Trileni official responsible for overseeing education on Kepler Station. Dr. Chen, the administrator's synthesized voice carried obvious strain. I've received several complaints about unauthorized modifications to Classroom Delta 7. Are you aware that your students have essentially reconstructed their learning environment without proper permits? Sarah smiled slightly. I'm aware that my students have demonstrated exceptional problem-solving capabilities, collaborative skills, and practical engineering knowledge. Are the modifications interfering with station operations? Well, no, Kylix admitted. Engineering has inspected the work and confirms that all modifications are safe and properly implemented, but the point is that proper authorization procedures were designed for typical educational modifications, not for optimizing learning environments for predator species, Sarah interrupted gently. Administrator, these students accomplished more collaborative engineering in 4 hours than most classes achieve in 4 weeks. Shouldn't we be celebrating that success rather than criticizing the methods? A long pause on the communication link. Dr. Chen, I have been fielding complaints about Class 7 Alpha for 6 months. Parents demanding results, teachers requesting hazard pay, other classes disrupted by noise complaints. This is the first day in 6 months that I haven't received a single complaint about those students. Sarah's smile widened. Would you like to know what they're working on today? She explained the missing ship investigation, emphasizing both the real-world application and the sophisticated analysis the students were already conducting. Another long pause. Dr. Chen, are you telling me that the students who have been completely unmanageable for 6 months are now conducting a professional-level investigation into a real missing vessel case? I'm telling you that they were never unmanageable, Sarah corrected. They were being educated using methods that were fundamentally incompatible with their cognitive and social development. The moment we adjusted our teaching methodology to work with their natural abilities instead of against them, they began demonstrating exactly the kinds of capabilities their species are known for. Remarkable, Kylix said softly. Dr. Chen, I should probably mention that several parents have requested meetings about their children's educational progress. Given the history of Class 7 Alpha, they're expecting the usual complaints about behavior problems and learning difficulties. Sarah checked the time. Schedule the meetings for the end of the week after the students have completed their investigation. I think those parents are going to be very surprised by what their children have accomplished. Very well, Kylix agreed. Dr. Chen, I hope you understand the significance of what you've achieved here. These students were considered genuinely unteachable by some of the most experienced educators in the galaxy. They were never unteachable, Sarah replied firmly. They just needed teachers who understood that predator intelligence operates differently from prey intelligence, and that different doesn't mean deficient. After ending the communication, Sarah returned her attention to monitoring the students' investigation. What she saw made her realize that she had underestimated their capabilities even more than previous teachers had. They weren't just solving the assigned problem, they were innovating new investigative methodologies. Jax and Kresh had developed a new type of mechanical failure analysis that combined database research with physical modeling, using Kresh's tactile abilities to identify stress patterns that wouldn't show up in standard diagnostic reports. Zix and Nim had created a 3-dimensional environmental simulation that accounted for how nebula conditions would affect different species' sensory capabilities, allowing them to predict how the mixed crew would perceive and respond to emergency situations. The Drakmori siblings were applying pack behavior analysis to crew dynamics in ways that had never been attempted in missing vessel investigations, providing insights into how cultural differences might affect survival decision-making. Most impressively, Vex had identified patterns across multiple disappearances that suggested the standard search protocols were based on incorrect assumptions about how ships behaved in dense particle environments. Sarah realized that she was no longer just teaching these students. She was watching them teach her. Their natural predator abilities, when properly channeled into intellectual challenges, were producing insights that purely prey species or purely human investigators would miss. She made a note to contact the station's security chief about the students' preliminary findings. If their analysis was as groundbreaking as it appeared, it might revolutionize search and rescue procedures throughout this sector of space. More importantly, it would prove that predator species education wasn't just possible. It was potentially superior to traditional educational approaches when properly implemented. As she watched 7 young predators collaborate on solving a problem that had stumped experienced investigators, Sarah began to understand that she hadn't just found a new way to teach these particular students. She had discovered something that might change education throughout the galaxy. But first, she needed to help them find a missing ship. 3 days later, Sarah entered the classroom to find 7 young predators arranged around a holographic display that showed the most sophisticated search pattern analysis she had ever seen. The missing ship investigation had evolved far beyond anything she had imagined possible. "Present your findings," she said, settling into a chair that Jax had modified with better ergonomic support. Apparently, the students had noticed that traditional furniture was designed for different body types and had made improvements. Vex stepped forward, his camouflage completely stable now that he was operating in his preferred mode of presentation. "We've identified 17 critical flaws in the standard search protocols used for the Kepler Nebula, developed a new mathematical model for predicting ship behavior in dense particle environments, and located the probable position of the meridian's edge." Sarah felt her eyebrows rise involuntarily. The probable position. Zix gestured toward the holographic display, which zoomed in to show a specific region of the nebula. Traditional search patterns assume that ships in distress will either maintain their last known heading or drift according to standard gravitational models. But those assumptions are based on normal space conditions. Nim's soft voice carried complete confidence as he continued the explanation. The nebula's particle density creates unique sensor shadows and gravitational anomalies. Ships entering these zones would experience equipment failures that force them to navigate using backup systems designed for different environmental conditions. The Drakmori siblings took over the presentation with tag-team precision. "We analyzed the psychological profiles of the missing crew," Senna began. 2 Zarathi pilots, extremely experienced but trained primarily in open space operations, Rake continued. Trilani navigator, expert in multiple ship classes but limited experience in dense particle environments. And 1 human engineer, Senna concluded. Species known for persistent problem-solving and reluctance to abandon salvageable equipment. Kresh activated a new section of the display showing detailed technical analysis. Cross-referencing the ship's maintenance records with known failure patterns for that vessel class operating in particle-dense environments, we identified 14 potential mechanical problems that could occur within the first 6 hours of nebula entry. Jack stepped forward, his mechanical expertise evident in every gesture. The human engineer would attempt repairs on at least 12 of those 14 problems. Zarathi pilots would support repair efforts rather than evacuation for approximately 72 hours based on cultural analysis of their species' approach to equipment preservation. The holographic display shifted to show a 3-dimensional model of predicted ship movement through the nebula. Combining mechanical failure probabilities, crew response patterns, and environmental drift calculations, we've identified a search zone that's significantly smaller than the area covered by previous search efforts, but in a completely different location. Sarah stared at the analysis, her mind racing through the implications. This is genuinely groundbreaking work. Have you verified your conclusions against known successful rescues in similar environments? We've tested our methodology against 15 resolved cases of ships recovered from dense particle environments, Vex replied. Our model successfully predicts the actual recovery locations in 14 of 15 cases. The one exception involved a ship with undocumented modifications that altered its response patterns. Sarah stood and walked around the holographic display, studying the analysis from multiple angles. The mathematical modeling was sophisticated, The cultural analysis was thorough, and the technical assessment was professionally rigorous. More importantly, the integration of multiple analytical approaches was something that single-species investigation teams rarely achieved. What's your recommendation for search operations? Nim gestured toward a highlighted section of the nebula. Concentrated search effort in grid section 7 Delta Gamma using sensor arrays specifically calibrated for the particle interference patterns we've identified. Estimated search time: 18 hours for preliminary sweep, 48 hours for comprehensive analysis. Kresh added, we've also developed modifications for standard rescue equipment that should improve effectiveness in dense particle environments by approximately 37%. Sarah activated her communication device. I'm contacting station security immediately. Chief Valorian needs to see this analysis. As she placed the call, she noticed that the 7 students were exchanging glances again. Their pack communication had become increasingly sophisticated over the past 3 days. Dr. Chen, Zix said carefully, we've also developed some additional conclusions that weren't part of the original assignment. Such as... Rake and Senna stepped forward together. We've identified patterns in disappearances throughout this stellar region that suggest systematic flaws in current search and rescue protocols. Jax activated another holographic display. Standard rescue operations are designed by and for prey species. They emphasize careful, methodical approaches that minimize risk to rescue teams. But those approaches are often too slow for time-sensitive rescue scenarios, Vex continued. Predator species would approach search operations differently, accepting higher risks to rescue teams in exchange for faster response times and higher success rates. Nim gestured toward a comprehensive analysis of rescue statistics. We've identified 43 cases over the past 2 years where faster response protocols might have resulted in successful rescues instead of recovery of non-survivors. Sarah stared at them. You're suggesting that search and rescue operations would be more effective if they incorporated predator species tactical approaches. We're suggesting that mixed species rescue teams, combining prey species caution with predator species aggressive intervention, would be significantly more effective than single-species approaches, Kresh corrected. Before Sarah could respond, her communication device chimed with an incoming call from Chief Valorian. Dr. Chen, the security chief's gruff voice filled the room. I've just reviewed the preliminary analysis your students submitted. I need to see them in person, immediately. Sarah looked around at 7 suddenly tense young faces. Chief, these are still students. If you need to discuss their analysis. Dr. Chen, Valorian interrupted, these students have just provided more useful insights into search and rescue operations than my department has generated in the past year. I'm not here to question them, I'm here to learn from them. 30 minutes later, Chief Valorian sat in the modified classroom staring at the holographic display, with the expression of someone watching their fundamental assumptions being systematically dismantled. Let me understand this correctly, he said slowly. You're telling me that the standard search grid we've been using is based on incorrect assumptions about ship behavior in particle-dense environments. Not incorrect, Zix replied diplomatically. Incomplete. The search grid works for ships operating under normal conditions with fully functional equipment, but ships in distress don't behave according to normal parameters. Valorian turned to study the 3-dimensional model of predicted ship movement. And you believe the Meridian's Edge is located in a completely unsearched area of the nebula. We believe there's an 87% probability that the ship is located within our predicted search zone, Nim corrected softly. The 13% margin accounts for unknown variables that could have affected crew decision-making. The security chief looked around at 7 young faces with growing respect. How long did it take you to develop this analysis? 72 hours of collaborative investigation, Jax replied. My department's analysis took 3 weeks and concluded that the ship was probably destroyed by nebula conditions, Valorian said grimly. What did we miss? Kresh gestured toward the technical display. You approached the problem as a mechanical investigation. Ship plus environment equals probable outcome, but you didn't account for the crew as active variables in the equation. Mechanical failures don't occur in isolation, Senna added. They occur as part of dynamic situations where intelligent beings are making decisions, adapting to changing conditions, and applying their species-specific problem-solving capabilities. Rake nodded toward his sister. Your investigation treated the crew as passive victims of mechanical and environmental forces. Our investigation treated them as active agents capable of innovative responses to emergency conditions. Valorian was quiet for a long moment, studying the analysis. Finally, he looked up at Sarah. Dr. Chen, I need to ask your students a very serious question. Sarah nodded, and Valorian turned to address the class directly. Would you be willing to participate in an actual search operation based on your analysis? Not as observers or consultants, but as active members of the search team. 7 young predators exchanged glances, their pack communication operating at lightning speed. What would our role be? Vex asked cautiously. Analysis, tactical planning, and real-time problem-solving support, Valorian replied. The search ship would be equipped with communication systems allowing you to provide guidance to the rescue teams based on ongoing analysis of findings. And if we locate the missing crew? Jax inquired. Then you'll have accomplished something that experienced search teams couldn't manage, Valorian said honestly. And you'll have proven that your educational approach produces results that traditional methods can't match. Sarah looked around at 7 eager faces and realized that her experimental teaching methodology was about to face the ultimate test. Chief, she said carefully, these students have demonstrated remarkable capabilities, but they're still learning, if we're talking about an actual rescue operation. Dr. Chen, Valorian interrupted, with respect, these students have already contributed more to this investigation than most of my experienced staff. Their analysis is sophisticated, their methodology is sound, and their conclusions are compelling. He gestured toward the holographic display. More importantly, they've approached this problem in ways that my department never considered. That kind of innovative thinking is exactly what we need for a difficult rescue operation. Zix spoke for the pack. We accept the assignment. Pending parental permission, Sarah added quickly. Already arranged, Valorian replied with a slight smile. I contacted all 7 sets of parents before coming here, when I explained that their children had developed breakthrough insights into search and rescue operations. They were enthusiastic about supporting the mission. Sarah realized that this moment represented far more than just a rescue operation. If the students succeeded, it would prove that predator species education could produce results that exceeded traditional academic achievement. If they failed, it would reinforce the prejudices that had led to 24 failed teachers. When does the search operation begin? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Valorian replied. The search ship, Tenacious, will be equipped with the sensor modifications your students recommended, and the search will focus on their predicted location zone. He stood to leave, then paused. Dr. Chen, regardless of the outcome of the search operation, what these students have accomplished is remarkable. In 3 days, they've challenged fundamental assumptions about search and rescue methodology, developed innovative analytical techniques, and demonstrated collaborative problem-solving capabilities that most professional teams can't match. After Valorian left, Sarah looked around at 7 young faces that showed a mixture of excitement, determination, and the focused intensity she had learned to associate with predator species preparing for a hunt. Are you ready for this? She asked. We've been ready all our lives, Zix replied. We just needed someone to give us a hunt worthy of our capabilities. The next morning, Sarah found herself aboard the search ship, Tenacious, watching 7 young predators coordinate a professional search operation with the kind of natural expertise that would have impressed experienced rescue teams. Jax and Kresh were monitoring the modified sensor arrays, their combined technical expertise allowing them to fine-tune the equipment in real time based on actual particle interference patterns. Zix and Nim were conducting 3-dimensional analysis of the search area, their spatial and sensory capabilities providing navigation guidance that was more precise than standard computer modeling. The Drakmori siblings were analyzing communication intercepts and debris patterns, using their pack dynamics expertise to predict how the missing crew would respond to changing emergency conditions. Vex was coordinating information flow between teams, his natural stealth and observation skills allowing him to monitor multiple data streams simultaneously without becoming overwhelmed. Most importantly, they were operating as a genuine pack, each individual contributing their maximum capabilities while maintaining constant communication and mutual support. "Contact," announced the Tenacious's sensor operator. Metallic signature bearing 127 Mark 34, approximately 15,000 meters into the search zone. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she watched 7 young faces focus with laser intensity on the incoming data. "Signature matches the drive configuration for a Meridian-class cargo vessel," Jax confirmed, his analysis of the sensor readings precise and confident. "Position is consistent with our drift calculations assuming mechanical failure in navigation systems approximately 74 hours after nebula entry," Zix added, his three-dimensional analysis providing real-time verification of their predictive model. "I'm detecting intermittent power signatures," Nim reported softly, his enhanced sensory capabilities allowing him to identify patterns that the standard sensors couldn't resolve. "Consistent with emergency power systems in conservation mode." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Emergency power in conservation mode meant the crew was still alive. "Multiple life signs confirmed," the Tenacious's medical scanner operator announced. 4 individuals in what appears to be emergency shelter configuration. Sarah watched 7 young predators exchange glances that carried a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and determination. They had found the missing crew, proven their analytical methodology, and saved 4 lives. But more importantly, they had proven that predator species education could achieve things that traditional academic approaches couldn't match. As the Tenacious moved into rescue formation, and Sarah watched 4 missing crew members being brought aboard alive and healthy, she realized that everything had changed. The 24 teachers who had given up on these students had been operating under the assumption that education was about forcing individuals to conform to predetermined standards. But effective education, particularly for predator species, was about providing individuals with challenges worthy of their capabilities, and then allowing them to exceed every expectation. Chief Valorian approached her as the rescue operation concluded. "Dr. Chen, I've just received communication from the Galactic Education Council. Word about your students' success has already reached the highest levels of the educational administration." Sarah looked around at 7 young faces, glowing with the satisfaction that came from applying their abilities to a meaningful challenge. "What kind of communication?" "They want to send observers to study your teaching methods," Valorian replied. "Apparently, there are similar problematic classes throughout the galaxy, and traditional educational approaches are failing across multiple species." Sarah smiled, watching her students celebrate their successful rescue operation with the kind of pack bonding that would serve them well throughout their lives. "Tell the Education Council they're welcome to observe," she said, "but they need to understand that this isn't about new teaching techniques. This is about recognizing that different species learn differently, and that different doesn't mean deficient." She looked around at the modified classroom, at 7 young predators who had exceeded every academic expectation while demonstrating capabilities that most adults couldn't match. "These students were never unteachable," she continued. "They just needed teachers who understood that predator intelligence is a gift to be developed, not a problem to be solved." As she watched 7 young faces planning their next collaborative investigation, Sarah realized that she had learned as much from them as they had learned from her. Sometimes the best way to teach predators was to give them something worth hunting. And sometimes the most important lesson was that the galaxy needed predator intelligence, predator capabilities, and predator perspectives to solve problems that prey species couldn't handle alone. The 24 teachers who had abandoned this class had missed the most important educational opportunity of their careers. But Sarah Chen had found 7 young beings who would change education throughout the galaxy, one successful hunt at a time.